globalization. First of all, what is it? You know, I mean, globalization, used neutrally, globalization just means international integration. Okay, everybody's in favor of it. I mean, it's been the core principle of the left and the working class movement since their origins. That's why every union is called an international. Okay, everybody's in favor of globalization. Now, the term has been appropriated by a narrow sector of power and privilege to refer to their version of international integration, the investor rights version. And that makes sense for them to try to to own the term, because anyone who's opposed to their version then becomes anti-globalization, meaning some kind of primitive who wants to go back to the Stone Age or something like that. It's a bad error on the part of the critics of this investor rights version of integration to accept the term anti-globalization. They should not. We're all in favor of globalization. The question is it going to be in the interests of people or in the interests of private power? But everybody's in favor of it. Okay, like nobody's opposed to the fact that you can call up your friend in Italy or something like that. That's integration. All right, now just using the term neutrally now, has it increased or has it decreased? Well, you know, in many respects it's decreased. So if you look at international economic integration, there are a lot of different measures. I mean, I mentioned one. There's a technical measure, which is convergence towards a single price and wage, single market. Well, that's declining. During the period of the last 25 years, it's been declining. Furthermore, it's predicted to decline even further. Okay, so the investor rights version of globalization is predicted by its advocates to lead to less globalization in the technical sense. More globalization in their sense means they have control more of the wealth and power in the world. So that's one question. Take what Adam Smith meant by it, okay? You're supposed to love Adam Smith. The core of free trade, according to Adam Smith, is what he called free circulation of labor, meaning people can go wherever they want. If you don't have that, you can't begin to talk about free trade. Well, if we measure that, what's happened to globalization? Well, it turns out the peak period was about over a century ago. Relative to population, the ability of people to move around was higher then than it's ever been since. Not for pretty reasons, incidentally. I don't mean that the reasons were nice. The reasons were that people who were fleeing the horrors of the Industrial Revolution in Europe could come to the United States and massacre the population and take over their lands. Okay, like it wasn't a pretty reason. But the fact, just in terms of movement of people across borders, is that it was higher then than it is now. I mean, that's why my parents didn't end up in a gas chamber, okay, because there was a lot of globalization in the sense of movement across borders. That's declined. And in fact, what has increased, on the other hand, by other measures, globalization has increased very fast, like movement of capital. So increase of capital flow across borders has just escalated astronomically in the last 25 years. Many international economists, mainstream ones, conclude that that's a substantial part of the reason why the performance of the international economy has been so poor in the last 25 years, and it has. By almost every macroeconomic measure, the performance of the economy is worse in the past 25 years than it was in the preceding 25 years, considerably. The period that's called globalization, the last 25 years, has seen a decline in just about everything. Rate of growth, rate of investment, even the rate of growth of trade has declined in the last 25 years. And a lot of economists attribute that to the increased financial volatility, the huge increase in capital flows across borders. In fact, this period of globalization, what's called globalization, past 25 years, was really initiated by the breakdown of capital controls. The Bretton Woods system, the preceding 25 years, was based on control of capital movements. You know, the countries could control capital movements, and currencies were regulated relative to one another within a pretty narrow band, which cut back speculation. And that was a period of huge growth. The period since has been much worse. So by that measure, freedom of movement of, say, speculative speculation against currencies, that kind of thing, capital flow across foreign exchange movements, that's just escalated enormously. So by that measure, there's more globalization. You measure by people, less globalization. By capital movement, more globalization. In fact, you see it very dramatically in the U.S.-Mexico relation. So the U.S.-Mexico border is, of course, an artificial border, like just about every border. It was established by conquest. Okay, U.S. conquered half of Mexico. That gives you the border. That's been a very porous border throughout history. People go up and back pretty freely in both directions for all kinds of reasons. It was militarized in 1994 under Clinton's Operation Gatekeeper. It was militarized in order to stop the movement of people across the border. That is, to cut back international integration. Why in 1994? Well, because that was the year when NAFTA was initiated. NAFTA is claimed to be something that increases integration between Mexico and the United States, but not people. Measured by people, it cuts back the flow. That's why you had to militarize the border. Why did they want to militarize the border? Well, because what they predicted in Mexico is what's called an economic miracle from NAFTA, which means a disaster for most of the population. What was predicted was that the effect of NAFTA on Mexico would be a devastating blow to the majority of the population, which has indeed happened. Wages have dropped precipitously, hundreds of thousands of people driven off the land. Investment has declined, though foreign investment has increased. And in general, it's been a kind of economic miracle. Economic miracle means that for a small sector of wealthy people and for foreign investors, it's fantastic. That's the definition of a miracle. For most of the population, it's been awful, and they expected that, and that's why you had to militarize the border. So did that increase integration or decrease it? Well, you know, that's an ideological question. Depends what you want to measure. When you militarize a border to prevent people from moving freely, by Adam Smith's measure, it decreases it. Okay, by the measure of, you know, the owners of the economy, it increases it. They make more profit. What about trade? You know, everybody reads that trade increased between Mexico and the United States. Did it? Well, not by Adam Smith's measures. Before NAFTA, you know, in 1993, there was plenty of movement of commodities across the border, but about 50% of it was internal to a firm. Okay, that's not trade. Okay, at least by classical economic measures. That's no more trade than if General Motors moved something from Indiana to Illinois. You know, if internal to a totalitarian institution, a command economy, you move something and it happens across a border, that's not trade in any meaningful sense. Well, it was 50% before NAFTA, now it's about 66%. So what about actual trade? You know, trade in some meaningful sense. Well, you know, nobody's measured it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's declined. You know, we don't know that it's even grown, even as fast as it was growing before. And intra-firm transfers are only a small part of centrally managed interactions. There's also what are called strategic alliances, you know, like IBM and Toshiba make some deal. Or there's what's called outsourcing, when a corporation uses some small non-unionized outfit somewhere to make things very cheaply, and they don't have to worry about wages and benefits, but they control it. And if it happens to cross borders, that's still centrally managed. Well, there haven't been any really careful analyses that I'm aware of, but the few studies that have been done, one by, I think, Brookings Institution, estimated that around 70% of cross-border interactions are probably centrally managed in one fashion or another, you know, intra-firm or strategic alliances or, you know, outsourcing or other devices. Actually, you could only get answers to this, one, if anybody studied it, and nobody studies it. And two, if you could get into it's the old question, the former question, if you could get into the internal workings of the totalitarian institutions that are running it, the command economies that are running it. But these estimates are probably somewhere in the right ballpark, which means that very little of what's going on across borders is trade in any serious sense. Some things have definitely declined, like movement of people. In the case of NAFTA, not just by accident, by militarizing the border. Just a day or two ago, Bush announced further militarization of the border. That's cutting back international integration. I mean, pretext is drugs, but that's pretext for anything. So you just can't answer these questions simply about globalization. There's just too many different ways of looking at it. If you look at it from the point of view of people's interests, it looks very different than if you look at it from the point of view of investors' interests. Just totally different. Will there be a change over the future? Well, nobody can predict human affairs at all. And too much depends on what people like you decide to do. It's a question of will and choice.